Hey Impact, hope you guys are doing well. It's 6:30 on Sunday night, the time when we are usually getting together to worship and learn together. Every time that reminder comes up on my phone, I think about you guys, I pray for you, I miss you, and I look forward to seeing some of you this week at the Impact or at the CVC Youth Drive Up. Hey, I wanted to let you know we're going to start launching Impact sermons on Sunday night at 6:30 during the normal time that we meet, both on Instagram and on Facebook. And so I've been trying to get them done by Fridays, but I just can't do it, guys. So it's going to be Sunday nights. Sunday nights is when we'll launch those sermons. And I would just encourage you, hey, maybe, fire up a Zoom call or FaceTime and watch together with some friends. Sermons are only about 10 to 12 minutes. And that leaves you some opportunity to have conversation. We're also doing some things on Instagram. If you have questions either about the sermon or just theology in general, I'll start spitting out answers this week to 3 minutes or 3-minute theology, I think is what we're calling it. So feel free to submit or to ask those questions or submit questions from the sermon this week. I'll stop talking. Well, I won't. You're going to see more of me here in just a second. But let's get into 1 Peter. Tonight, we're in the beginning of chapter 3. So you want your friend to know more about Jesus. How about this? Before you start talking to them about Jesus, act like you know Jesus. Peter tells us that the way that we act has a massive impact on people either wanting to know more about Jesus or not wanting to know any more about Jesus. At Winter Retreat, Papa Hop asked this important question to us. When light shines brightly on you, what is it that people see? In our text today, in 1 Peter, the entire section is dedicated to how to live in such a way that Christians don't get a bad reputation. And that's important because how we act matters. It reflects the God that we serve. The first section of 1 Peter chapter 2 is dedicated to our identity as Christians. That's sort of where Peter starts. That's the foundation. And he says that we're the chosen people of God, a people for his own possession. But he doesn't say that in order to make us arrogant or to puff us up. But he actually says it to prepare us for humility, for humble submission to other people, to remind us of who we are as we submit to others. And so the next section begins with these words. 1 Peter 2, 11 and 12 says, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation." This is sort of this thesis statement of the entire section. See, the non-Christians or the Gentiles, the non-Jews, were wanting to see if people who were following Jesus were upsetting the apple cart, were ruining their society. And Peter's saying, yes, you are different. You are redeemed by Jesus. You're not like everyone else. But that doesn't mean that you should be rebellious or foolish or arrogant or rude. You are to live honorably among unbelievers so that they have no reason to look at you and call you a hypocrite or to say, well, if you're a Christian and you're going to act like that, I don't want anything to do with your God. That's what Peter wants to guard against. And he gives us 3 examples of how we can humbly submit to others in order to make God look good. First, he says to submit yourselves to the authority of the government. And we talked about this a few weeks ago. Second, he says, submit yourself to earthly masters. And this section talks about slavery, which was very common in the Roman Empire during Peter's lifetime. This is verses 18 through 20. And Peter's not saying that slavery is okay. What he communicates in this section is that as a Christian, even in very unfair circumstances like slavery, that a Christian has the opportunity to show the sacrificial love of Christ by not repaying evil for evil, but by repaying evil with good. So his first step, he says, submit yourselves to the government, to the authority of the government. The second step that he says is submit yourself to earthly masters, those who have been put over you in authority. And then he talks about submission in marriage relationships in chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. He says, likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Verse 7, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. So first, Peter paints a picture of a marriage in which at some point the woman becomes a follower of Jesus. So they're both unbelievers, they're Gentiles, the gospel comes to this area, and the woman converts to Christianity. Well, in the Greco-Roman world, wives were not supposed to have their own friends. She only had friends that were her husband's friends, and she was expected to worship the same gods that her husband worshiped. This was one of the foundations of society, order and unity and submission in the home. A wife becoming a Christian had the potential to cause major problems in the home, but Peter doesn't want that to be the case. He doesn't want it to be the cause for people to say, hey, look, see, she became a Christian, now their marriage is a mess. So Peter is calling this newly converted wife to continue to act in a way that would bring honor to her husband and keep peace in the home. Just as in other areas, Peter does not want anyone to have an excuse to speak badly of Christians. In Paul's letter to the Ephesians, he explains that the marriage relationship is meant to reflect the selfless love of God for his people. So the submission of a wife to a husband and the submission of a husband to a wife is not because they are some way inferior, or a wife is not inferior to the husband's not better than the wife, but the submission, the mutual submission, is actually to the Lord and to one another for a specific purpose. In Christian marriage, it is to reflect the submissive, worshipful heart of the believer towards Jesus. In this case, where the woman is a believer and her husband is not, it is meant to win him to Christ by their unselfish example. That is what Peter's getting at with this whole thing, that we submit to other things in order to win people to Christ. Now, there's this section that talks about braiding your hair and jewelry and fine clothing. And I remember Emma Hamilton asked me one time, she was like, what's this all about? She had braids in her hair. And there's a specific reason and a practical reason. There's a spiritual reason and a practical reason to this instruction. I want you to notice Peter doesn't say, hey, ladies, you should look as frumpy as you possibly can. What he's actually talking about is what defines your beauty. The Greek word that is like adornment is that which makes you beautiful. So he's saying, let the things that define your beauty be the things that God cares about, the attitudes and the postures of your heart. Proverbs 31 reminds us that charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So he's not saying that you have to that you need to look ugly, but he's saying there are far more important things. He says, ladies, make every effort to focus on internal spiritual beauty. The other more practical reason that Peter makes this command is that here's the scenario. If a woman had been converted to Christianity, she would want to go to worship in the house where other believers were worshiping. And let's assume that she's honoring her husband and is submissive to him, and he's a great dude. So he allows her to go out to the house without him, which would be significant. It would be a stretch to worship. If she leaves her home all dressed up in nice clothes and jewelry with perfume on, what might the people in town think she was going to do? So that's why he's saying, don't put all that fancy stuff on, because you don't want to get, a bad rap in the community. Peter then moves on to give instruction to the husband to live in an honoring and understanding way with their wives. A true Christian husband does not lord over his wife, abuse her, control her. Husbands live with the reality that their Christian wives are co-heirs, they're of equal standing in their relationship to Christ. True biblical manhood, guys, looks very different than what the world might say. It's not arrogant or rude or controlling or domineering. It is gentle and humble, understanding and protective. And we live in this way to reflect Jesus to the world around us. that's always the end goal. So we don't choose a wife or a husband because of their looks or money or skills. We choose them based on how they will join us in the lifelong effort to make God look as wonderful, as beautiful as possible to the world around us. Now, how do we draw application for you guys? Because none of you are married. There are things you can think about in the future, but this whole section is actually about the way that we respond to the people in our lives. And Peter gives us 3 examples, but I want you to think about some of the areas in your life. Maybe you have a parent that's not a follower of Jesus. Does the way that you speak to them, respect them, and live with your siblings cause them to want to know Jesus? Or do they feel like, if that's what my son or daughter is like after going to church, I don't want anything to do with him? How about in school, the way that you act, speak, dress, respond to your teachers? Do they notice that you're a follower of Jesus to your friends, your teachers? Or do they just kind of think, yeah, they just go to church, but they're like everybody else? Maybe you want your brothers and your sisters to come to faith in Jesus. How do you act towards them? If you're saying, hey, I'm a Christian, I want you to be a Christian, but you're a jerk, do you give them a reason to want to know Jesus? That's good food for thought, friends, and only you can answer those questions. I'll just rephrase Papa Hop again. When light shines brightly on you, what do people see? Have a great weekend, and hopefully I'll see you this week at the CVC Youth Drive-By.